Okay. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen of the media, for coming at short notice. You would be aware that the CARICOM heads would have met during the course of this week, and at the close of the heads meeting, Prime Minister Holness of Jamaica would have issued a statement. Now, that statement is broad and it is specific to a few things in the region, but I think it is very important for us to have a conversation now here at home in Barbados. I've just come back to the country in order for us to be able to speak with the public about some of the issues attendant to the press conference, coming out of the press conference, and which will be top of mind as we proceed over the course of the next few months. One of the things that I wanted to bring to the attention of Barbadians, and I don't think it really got a lot of attraction at the closing statement, was the question of an agreement by the heads of CARICOM on a ferry service being implemented in the region. Now, the heads met in caucus among themselves, together with the Caribbean Private Sector Organization, and discussed this matter fairly thoroughly. We have been able to identify one vessel, which will be a large cargo vessel, and it will be operating, or it is intended to operate at this point, between Guyana and Barbados. You would have heard there would have been some discussions earlier with regard to Trinidad and Tobago participating. The intention is still for Trinidad and Tobago to participate, but as you know, Prime Minister Kamala Persad-Bissessar was not at that heads meeting, so I'm not in a position to speak in lieu of her determination of their willingness to continue in this vein. But certainly Guyana and Barbados are on board with regard to that, and we have already identified one cargo vessel. The intention is to have a connectivity across the island chain. So, for example, that those products which may be brought from Guyana to Barbados may now then be carried also to St. Vincent, may also be carried to Dominica. The intention, however, is to go beyond just moving cargo. We also want to find a way of moving people and to move people at inexpensive rates. So, for example, the businessman in Dominica who wishes to obtain some supplies from a hardware store in Barbados may wish to drive his van onto a ferry and be able to bring that van to Barbados. He drives in from point to point in Barbados, collects the things that he wants, drives back onto a ferry and goes back home. It is a concept which is now very common in Europe, where they have succeeded in deepening their integration movement. As we have now come to the point of deepening ours in similar capacity, there are some things obviously therefore that we now have to do. So we have already identified what are called RoPax vessels, where you roll on, roll off. And for those people who have seen it in operation between Trinidad and the island of Tobago, you would have seen vehicles being rolled onto a ferry, and you drive across and you drive into Tobago, do whatever you have to do, and you go back to Trinidad. That is an example of what it is that we're trying to be able to achieve. Now, discussions with the Caribbean Private Sector Organization indicate that they are on board. The discussions now turn on how we can drive the costs down, and the ambition is to have those costs per person well beneath 100 United States dollars per trip, and therefore making access between the islands far more competitive for a wider swath of people than they now are. Obviously, this is a process that is going to require substantial work over the course of the next few weeks, and for my sins, I have been named as the lead foreign minister on this matter, together with my sister Camina Johnson-Smith from Jamaica, who will be dealing primarily with the Northern Caribbean. The intention is for us to begin down here in the Southern Caribbean. We want to clear a few obvious obstacles, and I'm very happy to entertain you on some dialogue on this matter. There has to be clearly enhanced port facility, or alternatively, as we now have achieved it, free movement at ports of entry. There must also be a mutual recognition of vehicle registration in different countries. In similar vein, we have to be able to make sure that our driver's permits or driver's licenses are mutually recognized across participating member states. In similar vein, we also have to make sure that vehicle insurance policies are harmonized as best as practicable. This is a potential area of some challenge because every jurisdiction has its own insurance policies. The policies are jurisdictional specific. And in some cases, the reinsurers are not the same either, so that the reinsurers for many companies in one country may not be the same as others. And therefore, there's a level of harmonization now that has to be done not only at the regional level, but we'll also have global and international considerations because we don't have a single reinsurer in the Caribbean. So that takes us outside of the immediate range. Obviously, with regard to roll-on, roll-off vehicles, some ports are going to have to go through a period of upgrade in order to build out the capacity in order for them to do this. And as it is a matter of priority, it would be expected that member state by member state would be paying detailed attention to that in short order. And of course, we have now to remove non-tariff barriers, those administrative practices that make it more difficult to move product from country A to country B. Interestingly, that has been set up largely by the private sector in the region, who had on many occasions complained that they want different levels of protection. And so now it is the private sector which is saying, to make this happen, we have to remove some of those protections which we previously set up. So it is happy news that once again, the flow and speed of business in the region may become better and easier for the average person. And of course, I don't want to give you an exhaustive list, but just to give you an understanding of those things that we are prioritizing, there has to be also enhanced customs clearance at the ports of entry. So once we are able to get those things done within the next months, then this idea can become a reality. You will recall that it has been a dream now talked about for many, many years. And I'm pleased to say that coming out of this particular Heads of Government Conference, we've been given the green light together with the Caribbean Private Sector Organization, which is fully on board for the first time in order to drive this process forward. Now, colleagues, I want to turn a little bit to the question of the external trade relationships between our community and that of the United States of America. You will recall that on the 2nd of April 2025, President Trump would have issued an executive order seeking to regulate imports with a reciprocal tariff. And the intention behind that was made very clear by the White House. They wanted to rectify trade imbalances, which were leading to a deficit in goods trade between the United States and other countries. We in Barbados have made the point, and by extension, countries in the Caribbean have also made the point in our discussions with Secretary of State Rubio, that there are no goods of any type with which the United States has an inferior trade relationship to that which they have with Barbados, in that relationship they have with Barbados. And similarly, there is no sector in which the United States trade is inferior to that with Barbados. And so therefore, while we respect and appreciate the need for the United States to cure the problem domestically of trade deficits, we felt, and we have indicated, that there has to be a measure of proportionality in this matter, because there is an old precept articulated, first of all, by the philosopher Aristotle. As between equals, there must be equality, and as between unequals, there must be proportionality. And we felt that to say to us that we have a tariff wall of 10% on goods that go into the United States from Barbados, and that 10% is the same tariff wall that is erected against the United Arab Emirates, which is an economic superpower compared to us, or the same tariff wall that is erected against Great Britain, which is similarly placed in comparison to us, would be deeply unfair to Barbados, and by extension, all of us in the Caribbean who have that same type of tariff. Our efforts have not fallen on deaf ears, and I want to say a special word of thanks to Secretary of State Rubio and indeed to the U.S. Trade Representative, who effectively is their Minister of Foreign Trade, and of course to the executive of the United States headed by President Trump. They have now approached the World Trade Organization at their Committee of Trade in Goods with a proposal to extend to CARICOM, once again, a rollover of the Caribbean Basin Initiative and Caribbean Basin Economic Recovery Act for a period of 5 years. And my understanding from the World Trade Organization's representatives is that the outlook at this point is looking very favorable. Now, let me explain some of what that is about. In 1984, President Ronald Reagan would have given us a gift of market access to the United States for some specified commodities on which we do not pay duty. So we had quota-free entry and duty-free entry. You could send in as much as you like, and you did not pay any duty on it. That has been systematically continued president after president after president. For a period of years, usually 5 years or 6 years, that will happen, and then the President of the United States will be approached, and the President of the United States at that time goes to the World Trade Organization, and he invites the World Trade Organization to look favorably on the disposition of the United States towards us in CARICOM, and we benefit by market access to the United States without having to pay duty. And that enables us, colleagues, to be able to sell things into the United States at competitive rates. It really is a way of the U.S. extending a helping hand to small and vulnerable economies such as ours. Obviously, by the impositions that were made by the executive order of the 2nd of April 2025 with regard to the introduction of reciprocal tariffs, that whole scenario was threatened and perhaps would have changed. So it is after the diplomatic outreaches that we have now come to a point where we can say that the U.S. has in fact gone to the WTO and asked for the rollover and for the capacity for us to be able to continue to sell into their market at a level that would be free of duty. Now, we have not yet received from President Trump the proposals on what the specific duties will be. If you are following the international news, you would have heard during the course of the last few days that President Trump has indicated that every country is going to be written with respect to this question of what the future tariffs will be at the port of entry in the United States. We have not yet received any letter, but I do know that there are some larger entities, for example, Canada and so on, who have indicated that they have received their correspondence. I want to take the opportunity to say that the heads of government meeting in subcommittee on external trade, and I participated in that meeting, are very clear that we must now act in a more mature way, and that perhaps the time has come for us to take our trade agreements a lot more seriously on a country-by-country basis, and I speak now specifically to us in Barbados, and equally on a regional basis for all of us in CARICOM. It is not the happiest set of circumstances that you wait on a president of a foreign country to extend to you goodwill and to say to you, I am going to take pity on your economic vulnerability, and so therefore I am going to go to the World Trade Organization on your behalf and ask them to alter their rules so as to allow for you to be able to enter my market with your goods. That is essentially where we are with the United States. It was, as I said, a gift by President Reagan. But the question now must be asked of all of us, are we satisfied given what we have seen in recent times as to what can take place? Are we satisfied that we do not now need to have a more secure legal footing? In other words, a trade agreement in which we identify those areas where we feel we are very competitive, and in some cases in the Caribbean, we are globally competitive, and obviously the tourism industry is one of them. And let us therefore try to have that level of conversation with other countries as opposed to expecting perpetual and unceasing goodwill to be extended to us. That is really the issue. And I think it is something that as a country we must now reflect upon. I say it just for the purposes of demonstrating how serious this issue is, that we enjoy the same relationship with Canada. Canada's Prime Minister Mulroney would have given a similar type of market access to us on similar terms. In both cases, that which exists with the US and with Canada, they are in defiance of the global trade rules. It is non-reciprocal in nature. In other words, we benefit, but they don't in a similar way. And the question will at some point be asked by somebody, either in Canada or in the United States, how long are we going to continue to offer this to the Caribbean countries? And for how long will the Caribbean countries be expecting that they will just benefit from this goodwill indefinitely? It is, as I said, not the happiest place for independent countries to be, and therefore we have to be seriously looking now at what the next 5-10 years will be as we seek to make our economies more independent and more interlinked, so as to give us the kind of strength that we can trade as mature nations must. Having said that, let me turn now to the next question, which is that of the European Union's relationship with us. And again, coming out of the heads meeting, we were, in fact, on the day that the heads would have concluded their meeting, we were notified that the European Parliament has delisted or begun the process of delisting Barbados and Jamaica from a negative list that suggests that we have not been cooperative as jurisdictions in matters of international finance. Now, since 2023, we have been engaging with Europe on this matter. And we were placed on what has been called a delegated list. And that delegated list is really a set of countries whose issues came before the European Parliament at one time. And on that list with us was the United Arab Emirates and Panama and one or two others. And it was felt that even though Barbados was deemed by 2024 to have done all that we needed to do in order to be given a clean bill of health as a jurisdiction dealing in international financial services, unfortunately for us, Panama was on a list with us, and Panama was alleged to have been uncooperative with sanctions against Russia, having nothing to do with Barbados, of course. And the United Arab Emirates similarly were deemed to be uncooperative in terms of sanctions against Russia. And because of the system, the administrative system in the European Union, all of us on that list who were deemed to be clean jurisdictions, however, had to await the passage of all of the countries through that process of approval. Because there were some who had not been approved, therefore we find ourselves now in 2025, up to a couple of days ago, still on that list. It reflects that there was obviously an administrative approach taken in Europe that was very unkind and awkward for us in the Caribbean. I want to say to you that this has been a victory for diplomacy, and it has been a victory for dialogue. And I hope it has also been a lesson to all of us that we cannot cure problems outside of this country unless we are prepared to go and to interface and to meet and to talk with the people who are in charge of these types of situations that are impacting on Barbados. We cannot cure a problem that was hurting Barbados by way of loss of economic opportunity, by way of very slow process of changing their listing, while there were companies that were knocking on our doors and saying we're prepared, in the case of one bank, to register in Barbados as the domicile in which we operate and do transactions that would be in up to perhaps tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars. Insurance companies telling us the same thing, but then they go on pause when they realize that we have this difficulty with the European Union. It stood in the way of commercial development of this country, and it stood in the way of commercial development for at least 2 years. We were able, or have come to the point now, through the dialogue, and I want to say a special word of thanks to European President Ursula von der Leyen, Vice President Kaja Kallas. In my own case, I would have gone to Brussels and met with their Vice President. In Prime Minister Motley's case, she would have had repeated meetings with President von der Leyen. I also met with their Commissioner for International Partnerships and also their commissioners, well, for several of the other commissioners who are relevant to trying to shape and reshape the way things are done. We could not have come to this point without having had the level of dialogue that we have had. And we could not have had the level of dialogue if the people don't know who they're talking to. And it is necessary, therefore, for us sometimes now to get past the politics of who travels and how much who travels, and to recognize that there are some fundamental issues at stake, and we cannot cure them unless we build bridges with people. There is no entity in Barbados, no commercial entity that can function without having partnerships. And that is effectively what we have been doing, building partnerships across the Atlantic so that when issues of this nature arise, we are able to cure them. We are not completely out of the woods yet. There is still another stage to go within the European Parliament structure, where within the next few weeks, up until sometime in August, there is an opportunity for a plenary session to be convened of the members of Parliament, which is a full session. It is not now scheduled, but if there are objectors to us coming off of the list, and I say us because Jamaica is in a similar state of affairs, if there are objectors, then that session would have to be convened and the case would have to be heard further. At this point, however, there is no signal that that will happen, and so we keep our fingers crossed. We extend our thanks to the people of influence within the European Union, and quite frankly, we extend our thanks to the members of the European Parliament, because they too have been prepared to listen, be prepared to be responsive, and to understand the very special challenges which confront small states such as ours. Having said that, I then turn perhaps to the issue of greatest importance, and that is the free movement of people within this region. And we all know that since perhaps the creation of CARICOM, which I think is 1973, with the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas, the Treaty of Chaguaramas, and Prime Minister Barrow, as he then was, President Forbes Burnham, Dr. Eric Williams, then Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, and of course, Prime Minister Michael Manley of Jamaica. They are the founding fathers. They are the architects. And their ambition from as far back as 1973 was to come to a point where Caribbean people could move without being hindered from country to country, and that we would be in a state of affairs where we could reside, where we could work, where we did not have to rely on permits to come and go, we can remain indefinitely, etc. That ambition has defied every government of the Caribbean between 1973 and 2025. We are at a historical moment. And I say that in all seriousness because I recognize upon returning to Barbados that there is still a level of some concern about some aspects of this. And I get that. Change is never an easy thing, and progress does not come without some discomfort. But I think it is important to realize that it has been an ambition of this region for over 50 years. And it is a good thing that in our generation we have lived to see and to achieve a dream that was held by many who toiled in the vineyards and who died without seeing the success. Now, I think that from what I gather, top of mind for the Barbadian people at this point is obviously the question of security. And I want to say that the government of Barbados fully endorses and understands security concerns with regard to anything consequential upon the free movement. There have been people who have moved in and out of Caribbean countries under cover of darkness and tried to get into the country without crossing borders officially. We know that that has happened, and we know that we have, therefore, to strengthen our coast guards. We know we have to have a regional security service that does the type of surveillance and lends us the type of cooperation, and it is a national security matter, so I will not go into detail about what the RSS does. But let me say that coming out of the heads meeting, there has been a strengthening of the RSS capacity, and Suriname is now on board, bringing with it more personnel and more technical capacity to serve this Southern CARICOM region. I also want to say that in addition to that, we are very mindful of the fact that the concerns about crime do not easily go away. Perhaps I will say only this to the people of Barbados, and it is something that many may not have been aware of. When Prime Minister Motley was Attorney General, we held a World Cup here in Barbados in 2007. And during the course of that, or as in lead up to that World Cup, and during the course of that World Cup, we created what is called a single domestic space. And the legacy of that single domestic space still exists, whereby passengers on official aircraft, passengers, when I say official aircraft, private and commercial, passengers who are arriving by sea are all scrubbed against a list which is internationally recognized. I want to say that Interpol, U.S. Customs Border Protection Agency, are the entities with whom we work, so that in many cases we are aware of people who have criminal convictions. We are aware of who has been suspected of certain types of activity, even as that person is about to board an aircraft. I don't, again, wish to dwell too much on matters of national security, but I want for the public to take into the confidence of, or I want the public to take us into their confidence that matters of security are top of mind as we go forward in this, and that the movement of people by legal means should not be seen as a threat or an impediment to the progress that we must make. I recognize that there will be those who will always try to do those things that are illegal, and therefore it is necessary for us as a community of states to deepen our cooperation in the fight against illegality. Coming out of the Heads of Government Conference was also another matter about which perhaps some assurances should be given. And again, because they touch on national security, I will tread very delicately. The Chief Justices of this region all met together with the heads of government in an extended caucus meeting. And there has been a sharing of perspectives. There has been a sharing of concerns. There has been a sharing of best practices. Suffice it to say that as we progress now in the aftermath of understanding some of the concerns and best practices, we are at a stage where we recognize that there are some deficiencies in the way in which police cases, for example, are being prepared, and that there's a need for us to have a more harmonized approach to the way in which we are training our police, to the way in which we are strengthening our police forces, and to the way in which we are giving them the kind of technical tools to empower them to do the work that they must be able to do. Intelligence in these matters is very important, and they must be all equipped better in terms of intelligence. Coming out of the heads meeting also is an appreciation that, and we have seen it in Barbados, there are people who have had their cases thrown out of court, largely because the quality of the evidence adduced by the prosecutor is not of a satisfactory nature, and therefore it would render it unsafe for a criminally accused person to be placed before a jury. The quality of evidence and the preparation of case files, etc., has been a technical difficulty, and we have worked through some of the issues that have to be looked at, including better training. The regional training center here in Barbados is now going to be used as a regional center of excellence as we collaborate more deeply with international agencies such as Interpol, and Interpol now has an office established here in Barbados so as to enable us to be able to dig more deeply into some of the weaknesses in our system and to correct those systemic weaknesses as a matter of first priority. I take time to say these things because I want the country, as I said, to be taken into our confidence. We recognize that security is a matter of first priority. We recognize that there are some things that have to be done in order to make our protection of our citizens a far more robust process. Those matters are not unique to Barbados. They are common across this region, and this region has taken a determination at the level of the heads of government during this meeting to correct that deficiency. So without wanting to go much further on that particular matter, as I said, I don't want to delve too deeply into national security issues. That is where we are with respect to the heads of government meeting, and if there are any questions, I'm happy to field them know.
Good morning. Rachel Agard, CBC News. You touched on a lot of things that I had questions about, so thank you for that.
You're very welcome.
There's one, though. Following the passing of Trump's big, beautiful bill about a week and a half ago, how does that affect us in the Caribbean?
In what way specifically? I can't say that I have studied his big, beautiful bill.
I haven't studied it in depth and detail either, but in terms of the restrictions on people going and coming, if it is I want to migrate to the U.S., how does that affect us over there? Also, there's another part of that too, where it is they seem to have the slowdown on people applying for visas, and I know there are some students who have had their visas not approved. Where does that leave us right now at this point in time?
Okay, I can't speak specifically to any individual case of a person whose student visa has not been renewed, because there may be circumstances which are peculiar to individual cases. But more broadly, there was a pause on student visas. My understanding is that that has now been corrected or renewed. The process of delivering on these visas has been renewed. People have told me that they have gotten their visas. I do not know that it is a matter that still exists at a widespread level, but I'm happy to research that for you. Secondly, we recognize upfront, and I want to say this candidly to all Barbadians now, life that we knew and the way things perhaps we took for granted are not necessarily always going to be the same, and we have to respect change. In all of these matters, the United States is a sovereign country and must retain its right to deal with its internal administrative matters in the way that they see fit. Even though we may not always agree, they have that right, and we have to appreciate that. And in many cases, perhaps we have to begin to work around now some of the difficulties that present themselves. I am made to understand that one of the considerations in what is called the Big Beautiful Bill is the question of how you treat the immigrants. But that has been the subject of an executive order from day one. I think there are many aspects of this because it touches primarily on our diaspora. You will recall that from as early as February, I indicated that my ministry is now going to start to focus, or was then going to start to focus, on building out a diaspora policy. That is still the position of Barbados' Minister of Foreign Affairs. I think it is critically important that we do not wait on the goodwill of others, but that we put ourselves in a position where we can help Barbadians who are in circumstances of jeopardy, who live overseas. It is not only a problem in the United States of America. Let me say that. It perhaps is most acute in the United States of America by way of what is articulated. But there are challenges which present themselves now to our diaspora communities in other parts of the North Atlantic as well. And this is simply because the North Atlantic now is looking very inward, and there are many political figures in the countries of the North who do not look favorably on the diasporic population. And frankly, as you hear it openly said, in America, you have an America First policy. There are those who would want to have a Britain First policy. We saw in the German elections that there were those who were very hostile to the immigrant communities in Germany. And frankly, the leader of the opposition during the course of the last election in Canada had a public posture that was not entirely friendly to the diasporic community. So therefore, let us be real. The circumstances in which we live have been changing, and it is necessary for us now to have conversations that perhaps we have never had before, and that is why the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is working on a diasporic policy. And what should that policy look like? We have to think in terms of how best we can lend some measure of support and assistance to people who may be found in circumstances where a man may have gone to the United States and, as we know very often happens, may not have made himself perfectly right with their system. However, he has gotten married or has now lived with an American citizen, and that American citizen and him have now gotten 3 children. And in the last 20 years, he's been up there, though not having made himself perfectly right. There are 3 children who are now in school, and there's a house that has to be kept over their head, and there's question of their health care, etc. If he is taken up and arbitrarily thrown into a dragnet that disrupts the stability of that home, there are children of Barbadian descent who are impacted. And the question must now be, how can we relate to that? Now, I don't think anybody would realistically expect that we can lend financial assistance, but what we must be able to do is to give guidance. What are the protective services? How do you access those services? How are agencies such as the Southern Poverty Law Center and others, which are designed to lend assistance to people with a reduced capacity to defend themselves, how are they going to be brought on board to lend assistance to people in our diaspora? These are some of the considerations that we've never had before, but frankly speaking, we must now have. And those are the discussions that I'm having with people in our missions overseas.
Glad you brought that up. Which leads to my next question.
Okay.
So now that Mr. Trump is on his whole mass deportation exercise, has Barbados had any of those deportees? And if yes, you can say what the number looks like?
No, we have not had any brought to our attention at this point. I have, however, spoken to the U.S. Charge d'Affaires because, as you would be aware, our previous U.S. ambassador was recalled immediately upon President Trump coming into office. The Charge, myself, my permanent secretary, and the Director General of Foreign Affairs have come to an understanding that what we would want to have is a dossier on any person who is being repatriated, but deported from the United States to Barbados under those circumstances. Why do we want a dossier? We want to be able to have sufficient advanced knowledge of who it is that is coming back. We want to be able to be sure that if that person needs assistance with housing, that we're in a position to deal with that. We want to be able to be sure that if that person is deported in circumstances where they have a criminal record, what is the nature of the criminal record, how serious have been the crimes and the criminal offenses committed, and therefore that enables us to do the kind of national security considerations that we must do in order to ensure that that individual is not just reintegrated into the society and we do not know what they are capable of or have done or what connections they have, but rather that we manage the reintegration process in such a way that they do not become a threat to the wider community themselves. Those are some of the considerations that we have been discussing. That is the broad nature of the agreement that we have come to. And frankly speaking, we haven't been able to implement any of it yet because we have not gotten anybody, to the best of my knowledge, thus far.
So then that doesn't only hold for people coming from the United States, since this is a new thing, but this will be across the board for anybody who is brought back?
Yes, and we would want to have that relationship. That is effectively the best practice. That is certainly my understanding of how Jamaica operates, and Jamaica has had several persons. But again, that is not a new thing for Jamaica. They've been in this set of circumstances for a little while. What I would take the opportunity to say, though, Rachel, is this, and this has come to my attention, and I have spoken to the individual involved in no uncertain terms. And I happen to know that your previous publication house had done a story on this matter. There are several hundred Barbadians who now find themselves arriving at Canada's doorstep and claiming to be refugees. I do not know that in all of those cases you will not find anybody who can make out a case to say that they may be legitimately defined as a refugee. But I know that many of them are not. And they go there with a view to trying to benefit from what at that time has been Canada's very lavish social security provisions. So they hear that you can get access to housing fairly easily and that you may be set up in a job, and they say, oh, wow, this is great, let me try to do this. Not understanding that these things are for a very finite period of time and that at some point now you are going to be thrown into the open society if in fact you are deemed to be a refugee, because research is done on you even after you've come into the country. And it has come to pass that there are one or two people who've now come to me to say, well, Minister, can you help us? Because we went up there as refugees, and now the Canadians are saying that we have to leave, or that there is a problem with our status as a refugee, and can you help us, having given up a Barbados passport, come back into the country and be the Barbadian citizen once again? And I have had to say that, in every case that people do this, they are now doing serious injury to the reputation of the country. And they do serious injury to the confidence that the Canadian government can have in Barbados. And it is perhaps people see it as a personal privilege to be able to try that, but it is also a serious consequence to the wider Barbadian community and the reputation of Barbados as a jurisdiction. These are some of the things that people do, the games people play, but on one hand, you can't ask for government to be helping you and protecting you when you have difficulty overseas, when you yourself do injury to the country overseas for your own narrow personal ambitions.
And bringing it back a little closer to home, with the free movement, I know it is these 4 countries alone.
At present. 2 others have signed on to it, but they have asked for an extended period within which to get some adjustments put in place. For example, you have access to public education at the primary level and secondary level, so you may wish to do some increase the number of schools, for example. Or in terms of public offered health care, you want to make sure that you have the administrative systems to make sure that that works smoothly. Those are some of the adjustments internally that Guyana and Jamaica are now making before they, but they have committed themselves to it. It's just that they will not start from 1st of October.
Okay.
Right.
But in that same regard, with the security issues that you brought up and the crime issues that you brought up, I know normally sitting in court and just paying attention, I know that normally if someone who is a non-national of Barbados comes before the law courts and they're deemed to be found guilty or what's not, is usually a fine, and then they're handed over to immigration officials for deportation. Will that still hold on now that we're able to benefit from everything else that the average Barbadian citizen is as well? Then they will be treated just like a Barbadian who will go and serve their time or whatever other punishments or whatever is brought before them?
I would imagine that is how it would work. There would not be the automatic deportation, or there may not be a need for that, because if they are here legally, as in coming under the rules of the community, then there would be no need for that. Obviously, as I had said at the beginning, there are those people who try to enter the country illegally, and that has been from the beginning of time. And I suppose that will go on forever, because that is the nature of small islands. But if you are here legally, then yes, your question would be yes, they would be dealt with within the normal system.
And finally, so beginning the 1st of October, I am from wherever one of these countries that are able to benefit from the free movement. So I come and I just decide, all right, from the 1st of October, I can pick myself up and go to Barbados and look for a better life. So I come over here and I set up shop. But I don't have a job lined up. I don't have anything like that. But in the back of my head, I am able to benefit from everything else that the average Barbadian citizen is able to benefit from. How does that work?
But I don't think it could work, because you would have to be a very silly person to pick up half and home and just move, and you don't know what you're going to do, you don't know where you're going to live, you're going to hope for the best. I mean, I'm not going to say that there may be a person who will do that, but I don't think that would be the smartest person, because there's really, in effectively what you're saying, you're leaving where you are, and I presume you may be employed where you are, to go to be unemployed and sit down and hope that somebody would notice you. Well, Rachel, that ain't gonna happen. It's not practical to expect. Yeah, but there's no, you're not being offered brighter pastures. You're being offered job opportunities. You're being offered educational thing for your children. You're being offered public health assistance if you get sick. That's basically the extent of it. And equally, let us not, though, I know the temptation. The temptation is to look for every fault that we can find in it. But I want also for Barbadians to see the opportunities in this, because we are at a level of economic development in this country that right now is a trajectory point higher than where St. Vincent is and where Dominica is and where Belize is. That is not to say anything negative about those countries. It is just to say that Barbados has been able over the years to achieve a heck of a lot in terms of our developmental growth. It is an opportunity for Barbadians as well to be able to help carry some of those countries to the point where Barbados is. And that means that Barbadians who have skills, Barbadians who have job experience, Barbadians who have know-how, now have opportunities, not only here, but in other parts of the Caribbean, for them now to do some of the things that have brought them personal success and personal upward mobility. And there are a lot of Barbadians of all walks of life. I'm not only speaking now about the professional class and so on and so forth. There are business people in Barbados who can now say, boy, you know, I set up a little pool cleaning business and I was doing my thing on the West Coast. And it get a little crowded. But I can hold on to my West Coast market. I can employ some people to look after that here on the West Coast and then be going around the houses, cleaning the pools, etc. But why do I not break into St. Vincent? Because St. Vincent is going to be growing and St. Vincent will be having more hotels and St. Vincent already has a lot of villas and so on. And maybe I can compete over there and expand my business and expand everything that I'm doing. And it is that kind of approach that I think now we have to look at, as opposed to worrying about the individual, the unlikely soul who is going to leave all out in Belize to come and sit down in Barbados and they know nobody at all and stop in the house and hope that one day somebody can come and knock and give them something. Not likely to happen. All right.
Just one question.
Yes.
You mentioned earlier.
I thought you weren't going to ask questions.
Generally, though, you just took a Barbados delegation to Brazil.
Yes.
How much of that trip is in response to the instability that we're seeing in tariffs and shipping?
A lot of it. The trip to Brazil was really turning on the cost of living concern that we have in the country. And we felt that we would be able to identify out of Brazil a way in which we can help bring down the cost of living, certainly by being able to access some foodstuffs primarily. Brazil is exceptionally competitive, for example, in beef of all types. And that's really where the interest of the government is. Obviously, Brazil is also very competitive in things like poultry and pork, etc., but that is not so much a challenge for Barbados because we are almost self-sufficient in those things. Equally, fruits and vegetables, again, Brazil is very competitive. And Guyana has been able to create what we call a partial scope agreement. And that simply means it is a trade agreement that is limited to a few concrete things, among them the same products that I just talked about. And if you understand how it works, it is to say that the state of Roraima in the north of Brazil has a border with the state of Guyana. And effectively, they just drive across the border with the product, so it's into Guyana very easily. What we are now trying to do is to do a similar thing and either ship product from Guyana to Barbados or alternatively fly product from Roraima, Brazil to Barbados. One of the considerations coming out of it is that we use cargo planes which can move some of the perishables like fruits and vegetables very quickly to get them into Barbados. We also recognize that the prices are substantially lower, and so therefore there is a tremendous opportunity now for some Barbadians who are doing things with fruits and making natural juices to be able to find a raw material, a source product, very inexpensively, and then we do the value added here and be able to have a product which can be sold not only in Barbados but into the wider region. So there's a manufacturing opportunity or a food processing opportunity which is also there as well. And then as you know, this government has created an International Food Sciences Terminal. I think it is in Newton. And that International Food Sciences Terminal is now catering to individuals who are going in and they're being able to get assistance in some of the things you have to do as you develop a business like that. So how do you package effectively? And how do you put the labels on, the type of labels you need, et cetera, et cetera. So that value-added process that aids the small businessman or woman who operating on their own right now out of the house, for example, to be able to come to a point where you're employing 20, 30 people and you have a business that is capable of selling product not only across Barbados' shops and supermarkets, but equally into the region by extension. That's really what that is about.
Minister, before you wrap up, just clarify two things. In relation to the CARICOM movement, is it reciprocal between the 4 countries?
Yes.
So the others, it is not like somebody
No.
from another, okay. So that's
You have not signed on to it. You don't benefit from it. Your nationals will not benefit from it. If you stop from afar and look and see how good it working between St. Vincent and Barbados and you get jealous, as I suspect they will, then you will hurry up and get on board. But it is not for everybody who has not signed on. And let me say equally, that also should give some confidence to the Barbadian people because we are out of the gates early, and the opportunities we have now to make our own personal investments in other countries is something that is not, you're not getting competition from a wave of the rest of CARICOM. So, there's a basic principle in economics. It's called first mover advantage. And if you move early, the early bird catches the worm.
okay. And the second point, Larry, you mentioned the Suriname,
Yes.
and you said they're now connected
To the
that.
Regional Security
So,
Service.
are they now a member? That we wanted the absolute.
They are now going to come to become a member. Yes. So the commitment was given by their representative at the meeting of heads that they will now join the Regional Security Service. As you know, the Regional Security Service is very critical for us in terms of the policing of our maritime space and getting intelligence about movement of criminals and related types of activities. And it is strengthened by having more countries and more capacity come on board.
One more thing for clarification.
Yes, ma'am.
The education part of it, where it is from, you said just primary and secondary school, but does this extend to UE as well? So if I come up from Dominica or St. Vincent and I want to become a student at Cave Hill?
At this point, it does not, because the university system would now have to be brought into this discussion. In order to start to make it work, we did the things that give us a threshold for entry. You obviously want in every country not to have children that are not going to school, so therefore give them primary education, public primary education. It doesn't stop if a parent has money and wants to go and pay a private primary school, that's fine, and give them access to public education as well. As we go further and as time passes, then you get to higher rungs of the ladder, and we will no doubt want, with some of the discussions into the future, to see how best university can be brought in. One of the difficulties with the university, frankly speaking, is that you have to have the contributions being made right across the region to the university. And if at this point we still have some who have not signed on to this first step, it's very difficult to get them to go to a higher level immediately. So you claim little ground and then you fight the future battle. Claim little ground and fight the future battle. That, as I said though, the victory in this is that we have seen now the realization of the dream of Barrow and Manley and Burnham and Dr. Eric Williams. And it is for us now to carry that torch a step further. Okay? All right. Any other questions, folks? If not, thank you very much. I'm told that Roy wants to buy everybody pudding and sauce, so let us turn to that.